66 days of cold silence ended with a genomic detonation that threatens to expose the brutal truth of Nancy Guthrie's fate. The FBI remains paralyzed despite this breakthrough, leaving experts to wonder if the corruption traces back to Sheriff Nanos himself. There is a voice of clinical authority worth hearing: a veteran lead investigator who has closed over 300 complex cases. Her recent recorded testimony provides the forensic blueprint necessary to identify the predatory abductors who snatched Nancy Guthrie from her life. To grasp the magnitude of this fracture, we must first map the contaminated landscape of the original biological evidence found on site. This shift is seismic because the initial forensic pursuit hit a brick wall within hours of the first responder arriving. Discarded gloves found 2 miles from the home mirrored the suspect's kit. Their biological payload was immediately uploaded into the system. The Bureau's massive repository of 22 million known offenders, the combined DNA index system, responded with a haunting and absolute silence. Forensic comparison revealed a secondary failure. The skin cells on those gloves shared 0 markers with the traces recovered inside the residence. That high-profile lead withered when the profile was connected to a local service worker who frequently traversed the property's perimeter. He was a ghost in the machine, irrelevant to the crime. The true pivot occurred within a formal dispatch from authorities. Pima County officials issued a precise technical update during that same window, utilizing very specific and heavily guarded forensic terminology. Foreign biological signatures, distinct from the victim and her inner circle, were scraped from the cold surfaces of the property. Analysts struggled to assign a name to these shadows, while officials withheld the exact coordinates of the find within the house. The medium blood or skin remained classified, though the department confirmed the material was undergoing high-intensity sequencing in a specialized lab. With no federal hits, Nanos pivotally shifted the strategy toward the expansive, private world of investigative genetic genealogy for the profile. This methodology bypasses criminal records, instead hunting for the suspect through the digital family trees of unsuspecting and distant relatives. No rap sheet is required, only a single biological cousin who uploaded their saliva to a commercial database at some point in time. A single relative's curiosity about their heritage is enough to trigger a match. Then, the forensic landscape shifted quite violently. Nanos admitted to national media that the evidence was a chaotic, multi-contributor mess rather than a pristine and individual genetic signature. This was a biological soup of multiple identities, creating a computational nightmare that pushed the lab to its technological limits. The timeline stretched from weeks to an indefinite year as technicians fought to deconvolve the tangled and overlapping strands of human code. Scientists are trapped in a loop, extracting raw data only to find themselves blocked by the same impenetrable genetic overlap repeatedly. Current software lacks the precision to differentiate these specific contributors without introducing massive and inadmissible margins of statistical error. The contributors are fused at a molecular level, yielding data too volatile to be weaponized in a court of law. One algorithmic error would send detectives hunting a phantom, burning through resources while the actual predator remains free and at large. This is not incompetence, it is clinical discipline. They refuse to hand over a profile that a defense attorney could dismantle. Until the software catches up to the crime, that vial of evidence sits in stasis, ignored by the present technological era. The evidence is waiting for a future that hasn't arrived. However, mixed samples aren't always a forensic death sentence. Modern labs routinely handle blended samples, provided one individual left behind a dominant and overwhelming quantity of biological matter. If the count of individuals is low and their markers stay distinct, the extraction is a grueling but ultimately successful process. In standard cases, it is a hurdle. In the Guthrie case, Nanos is looking at a 12-month wait. These admissions of difficulty suggest a scenario far darker than a simple 2-person contact transfer or a routine sample. Technicians classify this as a complex mixture, a nightmare scenario where several people left nearly identical amounts of skin or sweat. With no dominant signature, the genetic profiles are stacked like opaque glass, hiding the true killer beneath layers of biological noise. Complete isolation becomes a statistical impossibility when the source is the microscopic debris of mere physical contact on a surface. This touch material is the invisible residue left by a palm or finger, absent of the richness found in blood. We are looking at picograms of data, a microscopic puzzle of trace deposits left by an unknown number of individuals. Identifying several strangers from a single swipe of skin cells remains the most brutal hurdle in modern forensic pathology today. No facility on the planet possesses the computational firepower required to untangle this specific web of human remnants and DNA. This brings the investigation to its knees, caught between two competing and entirely different systems of genetic identification. Two distinct forensic methodologies exist, and the void between them explains 66 days of absolute investigative paralysis in this case. The reason for the silence lies in the limitations of the first system, short tandem repeat profiling of DNA. This standard has served as the federal backbone since the 1990s, relying on predictable and repetitive genetic patterns. This specific system counts the rhythmic repetitions of code at set markers, creating a unique numerical identity for every person on Earth. Genetic traits bleed through generations in fixed, traceable codes. This methodology is cold fact, the probabilistic genotyping tools that laboratories utilize to strip apart chaotic STR mixtures. Modern algorithms now run digital simulations of every single permutation of DNA profiles buried in a sample, calculating the lethal probability of each suspect profile. It is engineered, scrutinized, and litigated in high-stakes courtrooms, then sharpened over 3 decades of trial and error. Judges have signed off on this science. High-priced defense teams have tried to break it, yet the math remains unshakable. For complex STR biological cocktails, unmasking the contributors is a riddle that technicians solved years ago, but the second system is SNP profiling single nucleotide polymorphism. This is the surgical weapon of modern genetic genealogy, functioning on a massive, terrifyingly precise mathematical architecture. SNP profiles ignore the simple repeat counts of old forensics. Instead, they scan individual rungs of the double helix, targeting hundreds of thousands of microscopic mutations scattered across the vast human blueprint. Each mutation is a digital fingerprint. When thousands of these points align, they construct a lethal map of a ghost's lineage, connecting them to biological relatives across a century of blood. This is the same engine used when you mail a spit kit to Ancestry or 23andMe for a breakdown of your ethnic origins and a list of nameless cousins. That is SNP analysis. It is this detailed data, not a basic STR profile, that gets cross-referenced in public databases to hunt a killer by tracing his roots outward from his own cells. SNP profiling exploded into the criminal justice system in 2018, roughly 8 years ago. That was the year Joseph DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, was finally cornered after 40 years of mocking the law. The capture did not happen because his prints were on file. He was caught because a distant blood relative uploaded their profile to GED Match. A forensic genealogist then identified a faint, partial, genetic tie between that cousin and the killer's cold case evidence, meticulously reverse engineering a family tree back through 40 years of births and deaths until DeAngelo's name appeared. The total time from the first digital upload to a confirmed suspect took mere weeks. Not decades, just weeks. That terrifying velocity shook the forensic world. That speed is exactly what this murder investigation requires. Yet, 8 years of progress have failed to fix one fatal glitch: unmasking a multi-person SNP mixture. The reason this task is harder for SNP than STR isn't just about difficulty, it is about pure mathematical volume. An STR profile only scans repeat counts at 20 isolated spots on a chromosome. An SNP profile analyzes hundreds of thousands of distinct data points across the entire human landscape. When a sample contains the genetic signatures of multiple people at similar volumes, the calculus of isolating one killer's massive data signature from the static of a second or third person becomes an exponential nightmare compared to basic STR. The sheer volume of potential mathematical outcomes explodes. The danger of manufacturing a phantom profile, one that would crumble under legal pressure or point to the wrong doorstep, is an absolute reality. The verified digital pipeline needed for reliable SNP separation in a package that crime labs can use and juries will trust simply does not exist yet. Specialized bioinformatics teams are coding it today, but it is unfinished. That explains why this evidence has yielded nothing in 66 days. This isn't a bureaucratic backlog, a staffing crisis, or a jurisdictional fight. The forensic code required to pull a killer's ghost from this specific biological wreckage has not been written yet. The most brutal explanation for why this case is stalled came directly from the lead genetic expert at Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based powerhouse that has deployed genetic hunting to close more than 300 frozen homicides. She has lived on the bleeding edge of this science since day one. Closing files before most detectives even understood the tech, she forged the protocols that are now the gold standard, resurrecting victims that old-school forensics left for dead. When she explains the silence surrounding this DNA, she isn't guessing. She is detailing the limits of a frontier she helped settle. When the lab confirmed foreign DNA in February, she broke the silence almost immediately. During a podcast interview with Brian Enton, she admitted she was hunting for this exact breakthrough, praying for unknown DNA at that crime scene, biological material with no connection to Nancy or her inner circle. If that phantom code could be isolated, she claimed it would end this investigation. She believes that if they truly possess that mystery DNA, a profile that belongs to no one in her world, the killer's name is already in the room. This forensic assessment is no vague theory. It is a clinical declaration from an expert who has observed this specific science identify predators that no other method could touch in cold cases spanning 10, 20, and 40 years. She wasn't being hyperbolic, she was being forensic. On Elizabeth Vargas Reports the next day, her tone remained analytical. She detailed the tactical split-stream approach investigators are currently deploying, running parallel forensic tracks to find a match. They are pushing the CODIS database and the genetic genealogy route simultaneously, refusing to wait for one to fail first. She characterized the decision to outsource the evidence to DNA Labs International as a strategically sound and defensible move. Her logic was grounded in infrastructure. DNA Labs International possesses the specific framework required to generate a SNP profile. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, she noted, lacks that specific technical capability within their internal forensic laboratories. Shipping the material to DNA Labs International was a calculated decision, given their unique ability to process the sample. They have the specialized capacity to create the SNP profile necessary for genetic genealogy, a tool the FBI lacks in-house. Any agency seeking to utilize investigative genetic genealogy must ship samples to a third-party specialized laboratory. That requirement includes the FBI. No federal lab currently bridges this specific technological gap internally. Routing the evidence to a facility capable of running both STR and SNP analyses at once was a tactical choice. It was a play to eliminate logistical handoffs and preserve time, the one asset this investigation is rapidly burning through. She proposed a visceral theory regarding the biological evidence. During a People magazine interview, she noted the sample likely consists of saliva. She analyzed the doorbell footage, noting the killer held a Bite flashlight between his teeth while approaching the door. As he leaned toward the lens, the physical mechanics suggest a high probability that suspect saliva was deposited. Fluids likely transferred from his mouth to his gloves, and then onto every surface he touched inside the residence. Saliva is a potent DNA source, but its presence creates a brutal forensic reality. The extreme complexity of the mixture. Suspect saliva was likely forced into layers of environmental debris, merging with the victim's own genetic history on those surfaces. That layering a stranger's biological fluids mixed with the victim's daily genetic footprint creates a forensic nightmare for analysts. This convergence of known and unknown biological material in a lived-in environment is the textbook definition of a complex mixture. That biological knot resists separation. In February, there was hope. The foreign DNA existed, and the technology was proven. This science has succeeded hundreds of times. However, her perspective shifted as the forensic timeline began to stall significantly. Initially, the news of a mixed sample didn't trigger alarms. She understood the inherent nature of crime scene forensics. A mixture can be an asset. It serves as forensic proof that the DNA resulted from a direct interaction. It tethers the suspect to the moment of the crime rather than suggesting accidental contamination from background noise. In certain scenarios, having multiple unknown contributors can actually heighten the mathematical certainty that the target's DNA is present. That was the early working theory. But as the clock kept ticking, the forensic optimism began to erode. Without a result, she deduced the mixture was far more chemically tangled than the initial laboratory assessment had suggested. The calendar provided the proof. When a top-tier lab like DNA Labs International hits a wall, it is not routine. This isn't a standard delay, it is an exceptional forensic roadblock that points to a profound level of biological degradation. In the SNP context, exceptional complexity means the mathematical tools to separate these strands do not exist yet. By March, the situation had stagnated, no result had emerged, and a 12-month timeline now loomed over the public. Now that Nanos has confirmed the delay, she provided the most clinical breakdown of this stalled hunt to date. During the Truth of the Matter podcast, she explained with surgical precision why the evidence remains biologically locked. It was the most transparent look at why this specific sample is currently a forensic dead end. When asked if a 12-month wait was accurate, she didn't offer comfort, she offered a bleak profile of the science. She refused to provide false reassurance. A 12-month estimate from a laboratory signals a massive technical failure. It indicates that current bioinformatics tools and deconvolution software are failing to crack the code of this specific mixture. Her interpretation is grim. The lab currently lacks the mechanical ability to isolate the killer's DNA from the noise. They are effectively frozen in time, hoping the technology evolves fast enough to catch up with this specific biological knot. The analysts aren't stalling. They are trapped, waiting for the ceiling of human science to physically rise. This forensic purgatory isn't new. A similar evolution occurred over 30 years with STR profiles. Standard tools took decades to validate. The killer's profile is there, but the door is currently bolted shut. Force the admission. The technology is non-existent. No current laboratory possesses this specific capability yet. DNA Labs International and the FBI are blind. She analyzed the perpetrator's mounting psychological paranoia. He entered that home, handled surfaces, and left invisible biological markers across the crime scene. Forensic science is a patient hunter. This evolution guarantees his capture. He should be terrified. Timing is the sole variable, the definitive forensic answer to the inquiry this investigation opened. Bypassing federal labs for a private Florida facility sparked institutional war, fracturing the case's credibility. Former Sheriff Richard Carmona, a clinical surgeon general, dissected this procedural failure in late March. Carmona was clinical and direct. He condemned Nanos for personally declaring the forensic scene open. Authority belongs strictly to lead detectives only after every bloodstain is bagged and cataloged meticulously. A sheriff acting as a field technician is a procedural anomaly, suggesting a compromised command. Why pay private labs when federal resources are free? This question fueled a massive revolt. The backlash was institutional. The deputies' union issued a unanimous vote of no confidence. By late March, the Board of Supervisors intervened, ordering the sheriff to testify under oath. They interrogated his management of the evidence, demanding a forensic breakdown of his logistical choices. Nanos remains defiant, backing his team, yet his logic collapses against cold technical reality. Scrutiny reveals a hard truth. The FBI lacks SNP profiling capability within its laboratories. This is a structural fact of forensic history, not incompetence. The technology simply is not there. Any agency pursuing genetic genealogy must outsource to private specialists. This is the industry standard. This includes the federal government. Routing evidence through the Bureau first would have delayed everything. It adds a redundant handoff, increasing contamination risks without providing any analytical benefit to investigators. Utilizing DNA Labs International allowed for simultaneous STR and SNP analysis, the fastest route available. Logistics cannot fix the math. No amount of paperwork can overcome the underlying scientific wall. The problem is the code. Software for separating complex SNP mixtures remains purely theoretical. No lab on Earth possesses it. No administrative decision in February could force it. The software is unbuilt. Even in federal custody, the result would be a forensic dead end. The barrier is not jurisdictional. It is the razor-thin edge of a science 8 years old. We face a specific category of problem that the bleeding edge has not reached. There is a second, quieter constraint hiding behind the mixture problem that the public ignores. It matters immensely for understanding the sequence required once the science finally catches up. Assume the mixture is solved tomorrow. A viable SNP profile is extracted for the genealogist. The investigation still lacks a name. It only possesses a digital starting point, a ghost. Speed depends entirely on the inhabitants of the genealogy. Databases law enforcement can legally access. Genetic genealogy is a digital dragnet. It searches for biological kin to triangulate a suspect. The system scans for genomic segments, looking for family connections hidden within millions of profiles. These segments match at levels indicating a bloodline connection buried deep within the suspect's history. Matches could be fifth cousins, distant strangers sharing a common ancestor from several generations prior. From these points, experts construct a family tree in reverse, tracing lineages with clinical precision. They cross-reference death certificates, census data, and obituaries, mapping out a path to the target. Branches are pruned based on geography and physical traits until the tree converges on a group. This is the exact methodology that finally trapped the Golden State Killer after decades. Investigators utilized GED match, finding a distant cousin who shared a tiny, significant fraction of DNA. They found a partial match, not apparent, but a relative sharing statistically significant genetic data. Genealogists worked backward to common ancestors, then forward through every descendant with forensic precision. They tracked every branch of the lineage until the pool of potential suspects narrowed. Traditional investigative work then eliminated suspects until only one name remained in the dragnet. Joseph D'Angelo was a genetic ghost, invisible within CODIS and absent from any prior criminal record. He was exposed by a law-abiding relative who unknowingly surrendered his identity to a public genetic database. While this forensic tool has broken hundreds of cases, it remains confined to repositories with legal authorization. The world's massive consumer genetic silos, like Ancestry DNA and its 25 million users, are strictly off-limits. 23andMe once held tens of millions, while MyHeritage archives millions more behind private firewalls. Criminal profilers are barred from these platforms unless a user explicitly waives their right to genetic privacy. Investigators are restricted to searching GED match and family tree DNA, the only portals allowing forensic comparisons. These platforms require an active opt-in for law enforcement, creating a bottleneck of available genetic data. Even this limited data pool unmasked the Golden State Killer and mapped the family tree of Bryan Kohberger. It has provided a clinical resolution to hundreds of cold cases that were otherwise destined for permanent silence. The primary variable dictating the speed of a match is the suspect's specific ancestral background. This is no minor statistical detail. It is the catalyst that separates a capture in hours from months of labor. Heritage dictates the timeline once the initial technical deconvolution of the biological sample is complete. Deciphering this demographic leverage is vital for anyone analyzing the trajectory of the Nancy Guthrie investigation. Predators with deep American roots and Northwest European lineages are trapped by a high density of genetic informants. Generations of domestic residency have populated the databases with a lethal network of unwitting distant cousins. These relatives are statistically predisposed to commercial testing, uploading raw code that serves as a forensic beacon. This results in accelerated kinship mapping and the rapid, surgical identification of a violent offender. Forensic genealogists confirm that for suspects within this demographic, the net tightens with terrifying clinical efficiency. With a viable profile, the digital hunt can culminate in a name within mere minutes or hours. Suspects with recent immigrant backgrounds, particularly from Latin America, benefit from a massive genetic blind spot. Sparse representation in these opt-in databases extends the search through weeks, months, or even years of silence. The science is persistent and eventually finds its mark, but the genealogical labor is significantly more taxing. It requires exhaustive patience while waiting for a single relevant relative to appear within the digital dragnet. The genetic origin of Nancy's abductor remains unconfirmed, leaving the timeline for justice a matter of speculation. Those following the case hold a specific power. Your idle DNA data could be the missing link. Failing to move raw data from Ancestry or 23andMe to GED match keeps the killer's door locked. A distant cousin who ports their file today could be the single entry point into a predator's family tree. The hunt cannot breach private corporate walls. It requires a bridge constructed by the public's genetic cooperation. Experts are now urging investigators to execute a total forensic reevaluation of the primary crime scene. Re-swabbing the home is mandatory. The failure to find a profile initially does not prove the absence of evidence. A rootless hair, shed naturally during the struggle, may have been ignored during the chaotic first-day sweep. Modern forensic tech can now extract workable sequences from rootless shafts, turning a discard into a lead. Surfaces once deemed irrelevant are being reconsidered through the lens of the predator's calculated movements. Mapping how the suspect navigated the home provides a pathway to bypass current laboratory bottlenecks in Florida. The most immediate leverage in this hunt likely has nothing to do with traditional lab processing. Forensic genealogists emphasize a disturbing probability. The suspect left a trail across multiple secondary scenes. The logic is clinical and difficult to refute. Nancy was taken, necessitating a secondary controlled environment. Retired FBI agent Maureen O'Connell scrutinized the blood on the porch, offering a lethal forensic interpretation. The droplet physics and the lack of a footprint void indicate a victim who was entirely airborne. Nancy was carried, her head tilted as she leaked life onto the floor, incapacitated and unable to resist. This reconstruction confirms a vehicle was utilized, transforming it into a mobile repository of biological evidence. Every location the suspect touched after leaving a structure, a room, or a property is a forensic goldmine. In those isolated spaces, the predator and victim existed together, and both left a permanent signature. We are biological leaky faucets. The suspect left his code in that room, waiting to be found. Nancy's biological signature remains etched onto every cold surface she touched. Her shadow left traces wherever he forced her to go. Once the predator removed his gloves, his epithelial cells shed into the dark, stagnant air, microscopic evidence of a monster unmasked. He walked past a recording lens, carrying his secret into a secondary scene, a single, pure genetic ghost waiting to be found. The math changes now. A clean SNP profile bypasses the mess of deconvolution. It bypasses the need for hypothetical software. We do not need future tech. This data can be weaponized against him in a genealogy database the second it is uploaded. No tangled biological mixtures here. No 12-month wait. Just a predatory profile meeting a forensic system built for this exact hunt. Success is imminent. She confirmed to News Nation that a viable profile from the kidnapper is the only key the investigators require. Regardless of where that genetic marker originates, investigative genealogy will name him. She is certain the predator is already mapped. A breakthrough is a matter of when, not if. The Brian Kohberger case stands as the brutal, logical blueprint for this. Kohberger was not caught by perfect scene DNA. His downfall was a single tan leather knife sheath abandoned in the blood. Left behind at the slaughter, one killer's distinct genetic signature dried onto a single piece of evidence waiting for a lab. When that sheath's SNP profile hit the system, the identification moved with a lethal, mechanical speed that stunned the public. It shocked those watching the stalemate. One sterile sample, one digital upload, and the wall of silence finally began to crack. The lineage was traced, the name emerged. Kohberger's capture provided a clinical roadmap that applies directly to this current nightmare. It exposed the forensic trap. Once genealogists pulled a name from the branches, the surveillance team moved in to finish him. Police did not strike immediately. They shadowed him, waiting for the moment he discarded a piece of trash, a used napkin perhaps. They harvested his DNA from his own garbage. This independent sample was processed far away from the genealogy database's initial lead. Lab techs compared the trash to the crime scene. The match provided absolute forensic confirmation, turning a lead into a cage. This is the protocol. Trace the family tree, secure a physical sample from the target, and then execute the arrest warrant. It is a calculated process. Once the name is known, the countdown to the handcuffs is measured in mere days. Years of waiting vanish instantly. This is the surgical timeline sitting just behind the wall of a solved deconvolution puzzle. The machinery is already oiled and waiting. This specific infrastructure has been idling in the background since day one. The hunt simply lacks the right bait. The expert in Florida refuses to admit defeat. The laboratory doors remain wide open. She detailed the science with cold, clinical precision. This is no stagnant dead end. It is a calculated push toward justice. We are standing at a violent frontier. Forensic technology has evolved with aggressive, exponential speed in just the last few years. Academic minds and forensic hunters are currently forcing a solution to extract viable SNP profiles from the most difficult samples. They are dissecting complex, multi-person mixtures. These scientists know that every breakthrough translates into another killer behind heavy steel bars. They operate with a desperate urgency and funding that simply did not exist 24 months ago. The clock is ticking. This scientific void now has a target on it. Experts are obsessively grinding away at the math required for the kill. Cracking SNP deconvolution will do more than solve this case. It will shatter the locks on hundreds of forgotten murders. She compared it to the rise of STR testing. Those digital profiling tools did not just materialize from thin air. They were forged through 30 years of clinical failure, legal warfare, and the slow accumulation of thousands of convict samples. Software was coded, ripped apart in court, and rebuilt for 30 years until it became the undisputed gold standard of evidence. It became the heartbeat of every crime lab. Deconvolution is currently at the violent start of that very same trajectory. But this cycle is faster, fueled by global data, massive computing power, and the public demand for a monster's head. This specific raw desperation for a result is a catalyst that previous forensic generations never possessed this early on. She expects the paradigm to shift within months. There is no set calendar, but the momentum of the science is undeniable. Nothing is guaranteed in a lab. Yet, she has watched how extreme pressure forces scientific theory to become a practical weapon. Pressure always yields progress, and the weight currently sitting on this specific technical hurdle is reaching a catastrophic breaking point. It is the highest peak of scrutiny ever recorded. Infamous cases have a history of dragging forensic science into the future. These shifts are impossible to see coming, but obvious in the rear view. The Golden State Killer forced a global adoption. He forced investigative genealogy into the hands of every precinct, accomplishing what decades of academic papers never could. The Idaho quadruple homicide forced these tools into active manhunts, proving they are not just for cold, forgotten files. This specific case, defined by a public technical bottleneck, possesses the raw kinetic energy required to shatter the current limits. It is the singular force that will finally perfect the SNP hunt. A contaminated biological mixture from a Florida crime scene is currently the only barrier between a predator and his cell. Across sterile labs, bioinformatics specialists are fixated on this bottleneck, their labor fueled by the palpable gravity of Nancy's fate. Historical precedent suggests extreme professional scrutiny yields a technical rupture. This is the precise mechanics of the looming forensic endgame. Once the digital architecture evolves, a pristine SNP profile isolated from contaminated Florida samples is handed to a waiting forensic genealogist. This genetic blueprint, a forensic fingerprint of millions of markers, becomes a beacon sent into the vast digital repositories of human ancestry. The data hits public servers, initiating a predatory search through millions of profiles for chromosomal segments, indicating a biological blood connection. If a biological relative exists within those servers, even a distant fifth cousin who uploaded data years ago, the trap snaps shut instantly. The software identifies a specific percentage of shared genetic material, providing a definitive anchor point within a sprawling, previously anonymous lineage. This shared sequence is the foundation. From this root, a forensic genealogist begins the meticulous, cold construction of a family tree. They exploit public archives, digging through digitized birth registries, death certificates, and census records to map the suspect's ancestors with precision. Every marriage index and archived obituary serves as a roadmap, tracing the suspect's line from that matched cousin back to a common progenitor. The process pivots, tracing forward from that shared ancestor to identify every living branch capable of producing the monster who left his mark. The genealogist systematically catalogs every male descendant, creating a finite list of individuals whose biology makes them a potential match for the crime. Logic dictates the next phase. Eliminate candidates by age, geographic proximity, and specific physical markers that define the predator's silhouette. Each name is audited against known facts: height, skeletal frame, the predatory gait observed, and the specific logistical gear he utilized. The statistical pool hemorrhages until hundreds of names become dozens, then a handful, before finally crystallizing into one singular identity. Field agents take over, initiating covert surveillance and tactical evidence recovery to secure a fresh biological sample from a discarded item. A used cup or a thrown-away cigarette becomes the final piece, allowing a direct comparison to the profile pulled from the genealogy search. If the sequences align, handcuffs follow. Experts confirm that for suspects with deep American roots and European heritage, this is devastatingly efficient. This specific demographic is overrepresented in global databases, meaning the predator's anonymity is anchored to a very thin, eroding line. Once that clean SNP profile is finalized and uploaded, the perpetrator's freedom is essentially measured in minutes or hours, not weeks. This isn't a theoretical best-case scenario. It is the standard operational outcome in modern forensics, proven hundreds of times in cold cases. Investigators have watched decades of silence evaporate when a database hits surfaces before the genealogist even completes the first family layer. After 66 days of agonizing silence, the brutal reality is this. The killer's DNA is held in a vial, awaiting the keys. The infrastructure is live. The databases are dense. The investigators are poised. All that remains is the final refinement of the code. Every technical component is currently standing by, awaiting one catalyst, a clean, isolated SNP profile from a sample locked by software limitations. This specific biological mixture has resisted separation because the necessary deconvolution software has not yet transitioned into a deployable forensic tool. A veteran forensic expert, responsible for resolving over 300 murders, maintains that once this digital hurdle is cleared, identification is swift. The identification of Nancy's killer will not be a grueling marathon. It will be a sudden collision between biology and modern computing. If this man has deep domestic roots and a single relative in those servers, the shroud of his identity will fail immediately. Yet, DNA is merely one strand. Investigators are also scrutinizing a specific digital anomaly that occurred the night she vanished from home. Sheriff Nanos confirmed in a March interview that a localized internet blackout and electrical surge are being forensically audited for significance. This disruption occurred during the exact temporal window when Nancy was taken, suggesting a calculated tactical move by a sophisticated abductor. Data logs indicate a precise period where home connectivity went dark, a dead zone in time that aligns perfectly with the crime. If this outage was intentional, it reveals a predator with high technical literacy and a cold, methodical approach to neutralizing his target. The suspect arrived at the Guthrie property with intimate knowledge of the digital defenses and a predetermined strategy to blind them. This level of pre-attack reconnaissance is not the hallmark of an impulsive offender, but the signature of a disciplined, patient stalker. Nanos has further confirmed that this was a targeted strike. The killer didn't just stumble upon Nancy Guthrie, he chose her. While the sheriff withheld the specific motive for selecting Nancy, the confirmation of a deliberate choice shifts the profile toward personal intent. Moving from a random crime to a targeted selection collapses the suspect pool to individuals who had a concrete, specific reason. Obsession and motive leave distinct traces, and when these behavioral markers intersect with a DNA match, the field will tighten forever. The net is closing, woven from biological markers and the digital echoes of a planned abduction, slowly being dismantled by logic. Post-disappearance ransom notes demanding Bitcoin were sent to news outlets, though their authenticity remains a subject of intense investigative skepticism. Savannah Guthrie stated in a March interview that while several were hoaxes, she and her siblings believe 2 were legitimate communications. Authorities have not publicly acknowledged that specific distinction. A clinical digital ghost now reconstructs the exact seconds of the night Nancy Guthrie disappeared into the dark. Surveillance and cellular pulses are being stripped for movement patterns, mapping a predator's calculated path through the midnight hours. A frantic attempt to scrub the digital trail failed, leaving behind persistent ghost signals that an amateur's deletion could never bury. This footprint doesn't name a suspect, but it acts as a cold filter, shrinking the search and pinning presence to coordinates. When this forensic geography intersects with DNA strands, the messy fog of theory hardens into a singular final reality. April 6th marked day 65 of the void. Savannah Guthrie resumed her anchor seat, masking a daughter's internal trauma. Her mother remained missing, but the studio was flooded in yellow, a jarring visual contrast to the dark nature of the abduction. Mournful spectators gripped yellow ribbons and placards, bearing the stark imperative Savannah once shared with the world: decide and do. That stoic philosophy was gifted by her mother after her father's death, a clinical directive to choose a path and execute it. Savannah's professional composure fractured before the crowd, yet she refused to speak the finality of death into existence, keeping hope ajar. A $1 million private bounty remains active, alongside a $100,000 federal reward for information leading to recovery. Pima County authorities will not pivot until Nancy Guthrie's physical remains are located, maintaining a relentless, high-pressure pursuit of the truth. The hunt persists until every lead is exhausted, with focus shifting to a Florida lab capable of extracting profiles from silence. Investigators are betting on a secondary crime scene or a forensic reswabbing of the original property to reveal hidden evidence. Accurate pattern recognition by this collective has consistently bypassed official investigations, rendering this discourse a vital forensic asset. If this surgical breakdown exposed details ignored by federal investigators, the resulting profile serves as the only logical foundation for interpreting the evidence once the next sequence begins.